The Zyrak Dominion controlled this part of the galaxy for over 100 years. Their empire was strong, their fleets were powerful, and no species had dared to challenge them. They had crushed enemies, destroyed entire civilizations, and taken whatever they wanted. To them, humans were nothing, just another weak species struggling to survive in the vast darkness of space. But one day, something changed. It started with a single blip on their long-range scanners. A warship had entered their territory, an unknown warship. At first, the Zyrak commanders were not concerned. They had seen many ships try to cross their borders. None had survived. Admiral Siren, the ruthless leader of the Zyrak fleet, leaned back in his command chair. His red eyes glowed under the dim lights of the control room. "Show me the intruder," he ordered. A holographic image of the unknown warship appeared before him. The room fell silent. The ship was massive, larger than anything the Zyrak had ever seen. Its surface was smooth and dark, like it was absorbing the very light around it. There were no visible weapons, no energy readings, no signs of a crew. It moved slowly but with purpose, as if it had no fear. Commander Varric, one of Tyron's officers, frowned. "Sir, this ship is not registered in any known database. Its design is unlike anything we've encountered." Admiral Siren narrowed his eyes. "Who does it belong to?" Varric hesitated before answering. "Sir, it's human." A cold silence filled the room. "Impossible," Siren growled. "Humans don't have this kind of technology." Yet, the warship continued moving deeper into Zyrak space. It did not send a message. It did not change course. It simply advanced, as if it had no interest in diplomacy or surrender. Admiral Siren clenched his fists. "Prepare the fleet. This ship will not leave our territory alive." Within minutes, dozens of Zyrak warships surrounded the mysterious vessel. The Zyrak fleet was one of the most advanced in the galaxy, equipped with powerful plasma cannons, energy disruptors, and impenetrable shields. Against them, no enemy had ever stood a chance. A communication channel was opened. A deep, growling voice from the Zyrak fleet commander echoed through the void. "Unidentified human vessel, you have entered Zyrak space illegally. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. If you resist, you will be destroyed." Silence. The human warship did not respond. It did not slow down. Siren's patience was running thin. He gave a cruel smile. "Fire a warning shot." A massive plasma blast shot through space, heading straight for the warship. It hit the dark hull directly. The Zyrak officers expected an explosion, a sign of damage. But nothing happened. The ship did not even tremble. Commander Varric stared at the readings. "Sir, the ship took no damage." Admiral Siren's smile disappeared. He leaned forward. "What?" The plasma blast had no effect. More plasma blasts were fired. Missiles launched. The Zyrak fleet unleashed everything they had. Explosions lit up the darkness of space as energy waves rippled outward. And yet, when the smoke cleared, the warship remained unharmed. It was as if the attacks never even touched it. Panic spread across the Zyrak fleet. Whispers filled the communication channels. "What kind of ship is this? Is it using advanced shields? No energy readings. This doesn't make sense." But the truth was much worse than they imagined. For the first time, the mysterious warship reacted. It began to move, not in the way other ships moved, but in a way that defied physics. It shifted positions without turning, as if space itself was bending around it. And then it vanished. 1 second, it was there. The next, it was behind the Zyrak fleet. Alarms blared across the Zyrak control rooms. How did it get there? No ship had ever moved like this. It broke all the laws of space travel. It had no jump drive activation, no energy signal. Admiral Siren felt something he had never felt before. Fear. "This is not a normal human ship," he whispered. "This is something else." And then, for the first time, the warship spoke. A deep mechanical voice echoed through every Zyrak warship, filling their minds with chilling certainty. You invaded our home. You took our people. You thought we were weak. Now, you will learn what it means to fear humanity. The Zirek officers froze. This was no ordinary warship. This was something far more dangerous, and it had just begun its mission. The Zirek fleet was in chaos. Officers shouted over one another. Screens flickered with warnings, and alarms blared through the command ships. The impossible had just happened. A single human warship had defied every known law of space combat. It had ignored their most powerful weapons, moved in ways that should not be possible, and now it had spoken. Admiral Chiron's claws dug into the armrests of his command chair. His crimson eyes were locked onto the massive, dark warship on the screen. "Scan it again," he snarled. "I want to know what we're dealing with." Commander Varick's hands flew over the control panel, but his face was pale. "Sir, we already scanned it. No heat signatures, no power core readings, no biological life detected." He swallowed hard. It's as if it's not even a real ship. Chiron bared his sharp teeth. Then what is it? The Zirek fleet had conquered hundreds of worlds. They had faced powerful warships, advanced alien technology, and unexpected resistance. But never had they seen a ship that felt like a ghost, a specter of war floating through space. "Open a channel," Chiron ordered. "I want to see the humans responsible for this." The screen flickered, but instead of a human face, there was only darkness. Then the same deep, mechanical voice rumbled through the fleet's communication systems. "You were warned." Chiron's scales bristled. "Who are you?" he demanded. Silence. Then a faint glow appeared in the distance, and before anyone could react, the human warship moved again. It didn't accelerate like normal ships. It simply wasn't there one moment, and then it was somewhere else. A Zirek battleship, one of the largest in the fleet, stood directly in its path. Its captain barely had time to react before the human warship phased through it. Gasps filled the command center. It just passed through solid matter. For a brief moment, the Zirek ship seemed untouched. Then, every system on board failed at once. The ship went dark, floating lifelessly in space. No explosions, no sign of an attack. Just silence. Then, the warship's voice returned. "You took our people. You burned our worlds. Did you think we would forget?" Chiron felt his chest tighten. No human had ever spoken to them like this before. Always, when faced with Zirek dominance, humans had been afraid. They had pleaded for mercy, begged for peace. But this ship was not afraid. And worse, it was not alone. Behind it, emerging from the darkness of space, came another warship. And another. And another. A fleet of human warships, all identical to the first, materialized out of nothingness. They were silent, powerful, and watching. Chiron's claws dug deeper into his chair. All ships, fire everything. The Zirek fleet unleashed a storm of plasma, torpedoes, and energy blasts. The space between them and the human fleet erupted into chaos. And yet, nothing hit. The moment the weapons were fired, the human ships vanished. The Zirek's own attacks flew past harmlessly, missing every target. Then, they reappeared. But now, they were positioned behind the Zirek fleet. Chiron's mind raced. They're toying with us. Then came the final message, one that sent a cold wave of terror through every Zirek officer. This is not a battle. This is a message. Then, in a synchronized movement, the human warships turned and disappeared. The Zirek fleet was left floating in the dark, untouched but utterly defeated. Admiral Chiron had never felt fear before. But now, as the realization sank in, his hands trembled. The humans had not come to fight. They had come to warn. And if the Zirek did not listen, the next time, the warships would not leave them alive. The Zirek fleet drifted in stunned silence. The human warships had vanished, leaving nothing behind but the weight of their warning. Admiral Xiron sat frozen in his command chair. His mind raced through possibilities, but none made sense. No known technology allowed a warship to move like that, to phase through matter, to disappear, to make an entire fleet powerless without firing a single shot. "Sir," Commander Varick's voice trembled. What do we do?" Xiron's claws curled into the armrests. For the first time in his long career, he did not know. The Zirak Empire had conquered dozens of star systems. They had faced resistance before. But this was something else. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to remain calm. "We return to High Command," he ordered. "We report what we saw." No one argued. They needed to understand what they had just encountered. The fleet turned, engines roaring to life as they prepared for the long journey home. But then, everything stopped. The ship's lights flickered. The hum of the engines vanished. Every console, every screen, went dark. Admiral Xiron's blood ran cold. Status report. Nothing. No response. No beeping consoles. Not even static. It was as if they had been cut off from the universe itself. Then, the darkness spoke. "You do not leave until you listen." The voice was not transmitted through their systems. It resonated inside their minds, like a presence lurking just beyond sight. A sudden, primal terror gripped the Zirak crew. This was not normal. Xiron forced his voice to remain steady. "Who are you?" A silence stretched for an eternity. Then, without warning, the screens flickered back to life, but they were not displaying ship data. They were showing Earth. Oceans, cities, forests, mountains, the human homeworld, spinning in the void. "Is this a threat?" Xiron growled. "No," the voice rumbled. "It is a lesson." The images shifted. Footage of burning human cities, colonies in ruins, Zirak warships bombarding defenseless worlds. Xiron recognized some of them. He had ordered those attacks. Then came new images. Human ships stripped apart, bodies floating in the void. Zirak warriors laughing, taking trophies from fallen enemies. A cold realization sank in. They had been watched, studied. The Zirak had believed humans were weak, disorganized, unworthy of fear. They had underestimated them. Xiron clenched his jaw. "If you seek revenge, then fight us. Enough of these tricks." The voice remained eerily calm. "You misunderstand." The screen changed again, showing something impossible. A Zirak world. Their own capital planet. As seen from orbit. Gasps filled the bridge. How were humans seeing this? Then, Xiron noticed something in the image that made his breath hitch. A shadow. Not on the planet, but above it. Something huge was blocking the light of a distant star. A shape too massive to be a normal warship. Xiron's stomach twisted. It was already there. Somewhere above their homeworld, something human was watching them. The voice spoke one last time. "This is not war. This is restraint." Then, everything came back. Lights, systems, power. It was as if nothing had happened. The Zirak fleet was adrift in deep space, their engines still warmed for departure. But they were not the same. Xiron swallowed hard. He understood now. The humans had become something else. Something their empire was not ready to face. Without another word, he turned to his crew. "Take us home. Now." No one hesitated. Because now, they knew the truth. The war was already over. The Zirak just hadn't realized it yet. The Zirak capital world, Varan 5, had never known fear. For centuries, it had stood as the impenetrable heart of the empire, shielded by planetary defenses that could annihilate fleets before they ever reached orbit. The Zirak had built their civilization on war, believing themselves untouchable. Until now. Deep in the High Command war room, the most powerful leaders of the empire sat in uneasy silence. Admiral Xiron's transmission had changed everything. The human ship was there, Xiron said, standing at the center of the chamber. His voice was grim. above this planet, watching us. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. Impossible. No ship, not even their own war-class dreadnoughts, could slip past Varan 5's defense grid undetected. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The humans had been there, and they had chosen to leave instead of attack. High Chancellor Zithos leaned forward, his silver eyes narrowing. You claim they did not fire a single shot. His voice was slow, measured. Why would they let us live? Sciron's fists clenched. He had asked himself the same question 100 times. They wanted us to know. Know what? That we lost. A murmur spread through the chamber. The very idea was insulting. The Zirak had never lost. Even when they faced resistance, they crushed it. They enslaved entire species. They wiped out planets without hesitation. And yet, the humans had them cornered, and did nothing. General Vorak, the head of planetary security, scoffed. This is absurd. One ship does not win a war. Sciron met his gaze, his voice like steel. That's where you're wrong. This ship is not a weapon. It is a message. A hush fell over the room. What do you mean? Zithos asked, his voice quieter now. Sciron inhaled sharply. He needed them to understand. Their technology is beyond anything we've seen. They control energy in ways we can't even measure. They shut down my fleet without touching us. They infiltrated our systems, read our history, and let us know they could strike at any moment. His claws tapped against the holotable. But they didn't. That was the part that haunted him most. The Zirak thrived on conquest. They understood brutality, power, annihilation. But this was control. They didn't need to fight. Sciron continued. They wanted us to sit in this very room and wonder, what happens if they change their minds? A cold silence settled over the chamber. The Zirak were predators. They had never been prey. But now, they weren't sure anymore. Zithos studied Sciron carefully, then turned to Vorak. You are in charge of planetary defenses. Can our weapons destroy this ship? Vorak hesitated. That hesitation spoke louder than any answer he could give. We have no data on their capabilities, he admitted, but our defense grid is the strongest in the Empire. And they bypassed it. Sciron cut in, without a single alarm being triggered. Zithos exhaled slowly. His fingers drummed against the table. We need more information. Sciron nodded. There's only one way to get it. For the first time in Zirak history, they would have to talk. Not conquer. Not threaten. Just talk. It was a concept so foreign, it left a bitter taste in Sciron's mouth. But deep down he knew. The Zirak weren't in control anymore. The Zirak Empire had never negotiated before. For centuries, their strategy had been simple: dominate or destroy. Their war fleets crushed resistance before it could form. Their diplomacy consisted of ultimatums: surrender or be erased. But now, they sat in uneasy silence, waiting for the impossible, waiting to speak with a human. Admiral Sciron stood at the center of the high command chamber, his claws clicking softly against the stone floor. The massive war room, usually filled with holographic battle maps and fleet projections, had been transformed into something unfamiliar, a diplomatic space. No weapons, no threats, only uncertainty. A holographic display flickered to life, and there it was, the human warship. Sleek, black, and massive, it hung in orbit above Varan 5 like an executioner's blade. Zirak dreadnoughts had tried to lock onto it, track it, analyze it, and every attempt had failed. Their sensors barely recognized it as a ship. It was something else, something beyond them. Then, without warning, a voice filled the chamber, a voice unlike anything they had expected. Calm, steady, human. This is Captain Ilias Voss of the UNS Dauntless. The Zirak leaders stiffened. No introduction, no warning, just confidence, as if the human already knew he had the upper hand. Xiron stepped forward, his voice controlled. You violated our airspace. You infiltrated our system. What do you want, human? A pause. Then, I want you to understand, Voss said. Xiron's eyes narrowed. Understand what? That you lost the war before it even began. A growl rippled through the Zurich Council. Arrogant, presumptuous. A lesser species daring to speak to them this way. Chancellor Zithos leaned forward, his silver gaze sharp. We are the Zurich Empire. We have conquered hundreds of worlds. If you think a single warship can intimidate us. This isn't about intimidation, Voss interrupted. Cold. Calculated. This is about reality. A silence stretched between them. Then the hologram changed. One by one, images began appearing. Zurich warships, floating lifelessly in the void. Battle stations, disabled in an instant. Entire fleets shut down without a single shot fired. The human ship had already been everywhere. Watching. Learning. Undoing the Zurich Empire without them even realizing it. Xiron's breath slowed. His claws twitched against his belt. This was impossible. How? He whispered. You built your empire on fear, Voss said. But what happens when the predators realize they're not at the top anymore? Xiron bared his teeth. We are not prey. Another image appeared. The Zurich homeworld. Their deepest, most secure stronghold. With a single command, the human warship had infiltrated its entire defense network. One press of a button, and the Zurich ceased to exist. And yet, the humans had not pressed it. Xiron's throat tightened. His mind raced. The Dauntless could have destroyed them, could have wiped them out in silence. But instead, they had chosen to talk. This was worse than war. This was control. What do you want from us? Zithos finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Voss's reply was simple. Nothing. Xiron's stomach twisted. That was the most terrifying answer of all. Not demands, not conquest, just indifference. The humans didn't see the Zurich as an enemy. They saw them as irrelevant. The war was over, and yet no battles had been fought. No fleets had clashed. No cities had burned. The Zurich Empire, feared across the stars, had been defeated without a single shot fired. Admiral Xiron stood in the heart of the High Command war room, his mind racing. The holographic projection of the human warship, UNS Dauntless, still loomed above them, a silent judge, watching, waiting. The words of Captain Elias Voss echoed in his mind. Nothing. That was their demand. Nothing. The Zurich had spent centuries conquering, expanding, enslaving lesser species, and now they were being told they were no longer worth fighting. No longer a threat. It was an insult greater than war. High Chancellor Zithos, silent for far too long, finally spoke. His voice was low and careful. You expect us to believe you came here just to prove a point. The human's hologram flickered. Voss was smiling. We didn't need to prove anything, he said. We wanted to see if you were smart enough to figure it out on your own. Xiron clenched his fists. They were playing with them. For the first time in Zurich history, they were not the hunters. They were the ones being studied. Zithos narrowed his silver eyes. And what happens now? Voss's expression didn't change. That depends on you. A hush fell over the war room. Then the hologram shifted again. New images appeared, footage from across the empire. Zurich *** colonies, military stations, entire fleets, *** everywhere, the same pattern. Systems shutting down, technology rendered useless. Their war machines, once unstoppable, now nothing but metal husks. The Dauntless had already crippled their empire. Without a war, without a fight, just knowledge. You don't have to surrender, Voss continued, almost casually. But let's be honest, you don't have a choice. Zithos' claws tapped against the stone table. He was thinking, calculating. He knew. The old rules of power no longer applied. Xiron's blood burned. This was unacceptable. The Zirac did not submit. They did not bow. And yet, here they were. A new image flickered into view. Xiron's breath caught. The Zirac homeworld. The great palace city that had stood for thousands of years. The seat of their empire. Targeted. A single press of a button, and the human ship could erase their civilization. No bombs. No war. Just erased. Xiron's claws dug into his palms. You could destroy us. Voss nodded. Easily. Then why haven't you? The human studied him for a long moment. Then he leaned forward. Because we don't need to. Silence. Xiron exhaled slowly. His heart pounded. They had already lost. The realization settled over the high command like a suffocating weight. The Zirac had spent centuries believing they were the strongest force in the galaxy, that they were the apex predators, that they controlled fate. But the humans were something else, something beyond war, beyond conquest. And the worst part, they weren't even afraid of the Zirac. Not anymore. For the first time in the Zirac Empire's long and ruthless history, there was no war, no fleet deployments, no retaliatory strikes, no desperate last stands. Just silence. Admiral Xiron sat in his private chamber, staring at the holoscreen in front of him. The UNS Dauntless still hung in the skies above their capital world, unmoving, unchallenged. It didn't need to move. It had already won. The human ship had crippled the Zirac war machine. Their fleets were dead in space, their weapons useless. A war fought and lost without a single battle. And yet, humanity had not taken the throne. They had not claimed the empire. They had not demanded surrender, resources, or obedience. Instead, they had left. Just like that. Xiron's claws twitched against his belt as he replayed his last conversation with Captain Ilias Voss. We don't need to rule you, the human had said. We don't care about your empire. But the rest of the galaxy does. And now, they know you're weak. That was the true death blow. The Zirac Empire had ruled through fear. Their enemies had submitted not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. Now, the entire galaxy had seen the truth. The Empire was vulnerable, defenseless. And in the void, there were no second chances. A notification flashed on Xiron's screen. New reports from the outer colonies. He hesitated, then opened them. His hands clenched. Revolts. Uprisings. Entire planets, once under firm Zirac control, now rejecting their rule. And worse, other species, formerly weak civilizations, ones the Zirac had conquered and enslaved, now rising. The humans had done nothing. They hadn't fired a single shot, hadn't planted their flag in Zirac soil. They hadn't needed to. They had simply let the galaxy see. The Zirac weren't unstoppable. They weren't gods. They were prey. A voice interrupted his thoughts. Admiral. Xiron turned. High Chancellor Zithos stood in the doorway. His silver eyes, once filled with arrogance and confidence, were empty. They're coming, Zithos said. His voice was hollow. Xiron didn't have to ask who. Not the humans. The others. The species they had conquered. The ones they had ruled for centuries. The ones who had once cowered in fear. Now, they saw the truth. The empire was broken, and there was no one left to stop what was coming. For the first time in his life, Xiron felt something he had never allowed himself to feel. Fear.